We're talking QB tiers next on Fantasy Football Today in 5. Welcome to FFT in 5. I'm Chris Towers. I'm here with Adam Azer. And look, training camp starts in about a week. We're right around the corner to the start of really the unofficial start of fantasy football draft prep season. And it's time to talk about tiers. You know, we've been talking about it all off season. Obviously, this week on the full episodes of Fantasy Football Today, we're doing every position. We're doing the same thing on FFT in 5, just a little quicker. And we're going to start at the quarterback position. How many quarterbacks belong in the top tier?
Three. Mahomes, Allen,
Yes.
Fritz.
And where should they be drafted?
Yeah, I think mid to late round 2 would be the earliest when you start to feel not great about someone else. I mean, to me, that's probably more like round 3, but I think mid to late round 2.
I think you can make a case that Mahomes and Allen should be in like a mini tier of their own, and then Hurts is in his own mini tier, just because Mahomes and Allen, we've obviously seen them do this now for 3 or 4 years in their cases, whereas Hurts has only really played on this level for 1 year. So if there's any regression, that wouldn't necessarily be surprising, but I think he's a clear step up from the next tier. Now, the question is, who's in tier 2 for you, Adam?
Yeah, it's a little bit different, I think, in 4-point versus 6-point.
Sure.
But I'll say Burrow is clearly in that. Burrow, I would say Burrow, Herbert, Fields, and Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
Lawrence is in his own tier for me. He's his own tier 3, but Lawrence, Herbert, Fields, and Jackson.
Yeah, I agree with that group. I have them in this order: Jackson, Burrow, Herbert, and Fields. And obviously, when we're drafting, it's usually Burrow in the 4th spot, especially when you look at ADP. Jackson will go ahead of him occasionally. I think Fields, it's a lot less frequent. And then Justin Herbert's the one guy who I feel like in drafts often can be a little bit forgotten. But the way I look at it is kind of, Joe Burrow is going to be like a 4th round pick in most leagues. And Justin Fields is probably going to go maybe 2 rounds later. And I kind of think they're just the same guy. We've seen Fields or Herbert, 26 points per game in his first 2 NFL seasons. That's where Burrow got last season. Obviously, Herbert took a big step back last season, but with Kellen Moore taking over as offensive coordinator, we talked about on last Friday's episode, Dan Schneier and I, about Justin Herbert as a bounce back candidate. I feel really good about him getting back to that 25 point per game range. How do you feel about Justin Herbert?
I feel really good about him. I talked about this on the full length show. I just want to clarify. I may have said on the second time, I may have said Lawrence, Jackson, Fields, Herbert. I meant Burrow. As I mentioned, Lawrence is just behind these guys. I feel great about Herbert. I looked at some of the most the pleasant surprises at the quarterback position over the last 5 seasons, and there were a handful of them that were veterans who bounced back from bad years and had already done it before. He's that. And there were a handful of them that had new offensive coordinators, like Ben Roethlisberger in 2018, like Dak Prescott in 2019. So there was one other that Kirk Cousins last year. We saw just an uptick in pass attempts, for example, and a really good fantasy season for him. So I think that those 2 things work in his favor, and he's done it before, and he's got a new offensive coordinator. Both will help. I feel very confident in him. I actually don't feel as confident in Lamar Jackson. I almost hesitate to put him in this tier, but he probably deserves it. But I am a little worried for him. He does also meet that criteria, right? Veteran guy who's been great before and has a new offensive coordinator. I'm not
better. He's been better, not just great. He's been better than anyone we've seen in the NFL.
Yeah.
At his best. Yeah.
Right. Just I'm a little nervous about him adjusting to a new system.
Sure.
He's a different type of quarterback now, playing maybe a different brand of football.
And we're assuming this is a big upgrade in wide receiver group, but I mean, Odell Beckham, I don't think has had over 600 yards since 2019. Zay Flowers, obviously unproven. Rashad Bateman's been pretty disappointing, but then I look back at the beginning of last season before Bateman got hurt. I think Jackson was averaging 40 points per game through his first 3 games. He was having an absolutely absurd start to the season. So it's an upside downside thing. You have Trevor Lawrence in his own tier after that group, right?
I do. I think he has more upside than Dak Prescott and Tua Tagovailoa.
I will quibble on the upside. I think Tua's got comparable, maybe even higher upside, but obviously Lawrence is much safer.
I think so. And I think you could say that about Deshaun Watson too. I think Watson has similar upside because he has shown it. So maybe Lawrence shouldn't be in that tier. But I have a hard time seeing Lawrence having a bad year. Sure. That's kind of what it is. The other guys, I could see them having a bad year more easily than Lawrence.
And then who's in that next tier for you?
So that would be Dak Prescott, Deshaun Watson, and Tua Tagovailoa. Am I forgetting someone? I feel like I'm missing someone.
I've got Anthony Richardson in
Oh,
there,
yeah,
and I'm pretty sure the consensus, at least among our guys, we're very high. I think he's QB 10 at least for Dave, Jamie, and Heath. He's 12 for me. That is maybe the ultimate boomer bust pick of the year, right?
Oh, 100%. Though I seriously have a hard time seeing him booming because I think his passing numbers are going to be absolutely putrid. And if you look at the mobile quarterbacks who have had boom years, they've also had really good passing years. So I could see it from Justin Fields. I could see him approaching 30 touchdown passes and 3,000 yards, something like that passing, maybe no more than that, 3,200. I can't see Richardson like even coming close. So no, I think like QB 8, even with all the rushing, I think QB 8 is kind of the ceiling for Richardson, but I am definitely the low guy at CBS on him.
Yeah, I will. I think after this, the tiers get pretty wide open and it's just kind of take your pick. I will say, I think you can make a pretty good case for Geno Smith belonging in that previous tier. It's one of those tough ones where the tape, the statistical numbers, everything you want to look at, the advanced metrics, they all say Geno Smith played at an outstanding level last season. It's just, we've only seen him do it once. And so there are reasons to be skeptical, but he was arguably the best deep passer in the NFL. He's got an incredible receiving core with the addition of Jackson Smith and Jigba. It could be a situation where we're looking back at, Geno Smith as QB 14 in ADP and thinking, well, that was a mistake because he might end up finishing like QB 6 or something. So
yeah,
he's another guy I think might belong in that group.
Yep. Rodgers. I like Rodgers better than Geno Smith.
Sure.
May not be a popular pick, but if somebody can go out and play at an MVP level, I think it's Rodgers more likely than Geno. I think you started to see the regression toward the end of the season with all the interceptions. We had a recent guest that said Geno had the most interceptable passes that were not actually intercepted last year. And then, started to not get away with it at the end of the season. So I'm not real. That's the tier I avoid, to be quite honest with you. I don't want to be in the Kirk Cousins, Daniel Jones, Geno Smith, Aaron Rodgers group necessarily. I'd rather just wait for Russell Wilson and no, I'm not going to say Tannehill, but he's creeping into that discussion.
My view on that group, and part of the reason why I don't love them is just if I'm taking one of those guys, I'm probably taking a second quarterback. And I just don't think that's the most efficient way to build a roster. I typically only want one quarterback on my team and just not have to worry about it. So I'm typically taking from one of the top 2 tiers. And that's going to do it for FFT and 5. We'll be back tomorrow to talk RB tiers. We'll see you then.